Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. This is we quickly pulled this together because in the Pacific Northwest we've got some forecasted extreme high heat temperatures, which is unusual for us. For us, that's temperatures of 100 or more in the Pacific Northwest. We've asked our brethren from the desert region, the MRA Desert Region, to join us, who operate in high temperatures all the time. So with that, if I will, Justin, if you could just do a quick intro, and then we'll go to Eric.
Yeah, my name is Justin Byrne. I'm with Central Arizona Mountain Rescue, and our first due is in the Phoenix area. It's for Maricopa County, and I grew up in the desert. I've been here for 40 years. I'm a native, so I've learned to adapt to the heat and 110 and 120 degrees weather is not uncommon, and so come up with a lot of tips and tricks that over many years I've I've developed, and they might not be intuitive for somebody who doesn't or hasn't had to operate in this environment. And so I'm really looking forward to sharing some of that knowledge. And it was kind of interesting to think through some of the things that I do to prep for the hot weather. So it made me kind of like evaluate my responsiveness too. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. So thank you for inviting me.
Great. Thanks, Justin. Eric.
Yeah, hi guys. Eric Davis. I'm with the Southern Arizona Rescue Association. We're down in Tucson and primarily cover Pima County. Occasionally we go in. We'll do mutual aids with our friends up in Phoenix, and occasionally get up to Flagstaff. And we've got some newer team down in Cochise and Santa Cruz County. We work with them as well. So get a lot of opportunity to get out here in the heat. See, I've been doing search and rescue, got into this in 2007. So whatever the math is there, I've been, I'm not going to do public math. It's been a long week. And then I've been out here in Tucson since 99. So 22 years now. So I'm not a native like Justin, but I am pretty thin blooded. So when we were out in Pennsylvania last week, it was cold. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for setting this up, Doug. This is great.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Just out of curiosity, what's a typical temperature that you guys would go out in, maybe this time of year?
It's 110 degrees. So that's one of the things that we manage, in coordination with the sheriff's office and the search and rescue coordinators is what is the most bang for our buck, the time of the day that we can go out and operate safely. And so that's in pre-planning and kind of having a good understanding with the sheriff's office about what our capabilities are and how long we can stay out. And it's really limited by water, like how much water we can carry. And and I think Eric would also concur with this is, and we'll get into it later too, is that pre-planning is much about acclimating and operating in the heat. So the limiting factor is really the resources that we can carry with us, and not so much like the exposure, because I've been on searches that are all day long in 110 and 115 degree weather. But more recently, they've taken a safer approach and kind of had us do more early morning to early afternoon, and keep us out of the field in the hottest part of the day. So that's just, it's really dependent on the situation and what we're facing. Eric, is it similar in Sarah?
Yeah, I would say so. We're a little bit higher elevation than you guys, so we'll probably get about 5 to 7 degree cooler temperatures. But in the prime of the day, if we've got these searches up in the canyons, you're talking, there's been those 4th of July weekends where it's 100 and 115 in the canyon, by midday. But yeah, and that's what we like to say is there's never calls when it's beautiful hiking weather, right? So I think that's kind of what Justin was hitting at. One of the things that that we pay attention to is you know, is it the third call of the day, right? How many people on the team have been out on calls earlier in the day, right? And we have to, you know, talking about that personal care, kind of reflecting on yourself and making sure that you're ready to go out in the field, and you're not going to end up as you know, one of the casualties of the day, if you will. I think Justin hit a little bit on prehydrating as well, right? So we do have some calls during the week, but usually the weekends tend to be a little bit more active. So if you know that on a, you know, Friday afternoon, Friday night, prehydrate, you know, if you know you're going to be available for the weekend, kind of amp yourself up for it ahead of time.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most important thing that we could hit on during this conversation is the prep and acclimation. I know, like, you're going to hit these high temperatures, and what we commonly think of is it taking a long time to get acclimated to that those high temperatures, but there's still things that just human physiology you can do to set yourself up for success. So it's like, you know, drinking 3 liters, like aiming for that 3 liters of water a day, and doing it slowly over the course of the day, because like the general rule of thumb is you can only absorb a liter or so of water an hour. And so if you're on your way to a mission and you guzzle a gallon of water, you're really wasting a couple of liters because you can't absorb it that fast. So if you're not starting at a deficit, you're setting yourself up for success. So it's like just trying to, one, prehydrate and fuel up, stay, you know, fed. And then the other one is, this is more acclimation over time, but we all just sit in an office during the week, and we sit at home watching TV, except for the time that we're exercising. What I like to do, especially in the summer, is spend a little extra time outside or driving with the windows open and no AC on, because like you just need at least 45 minutes or an hour to get the benefits of that hot weather, so that when you're actually exercising in it, your body isn't just shocked into that hot weather because you just came out of AC.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's a really good point. Like, you know, if you just get dropped off at Camp Muir or the summit of Mount Rainier, you're going to have a hard time with the acclimatization of just the oxygen. And so that sounds, you know, very similar to the heat exposure as well. It takes some time, and I think that's something that, you know, in the Pacific Northwest, we're not as accustomed to that. You know, as we're talking about extreme heat here is about 100 degrees or maybe more, but you guys go out in 110 degrees. So, but it's a dry heat right here, so it's different, right?
Well, that's one of the problems, and honestly, it is. I mean, I like it. It helps, but you also don't notice yourself sweating, right? So when we were in Pennsylvania a couple weeks ago, right? I mean, as soon as I got off the airplane, I was just wet, right? Because of that humidity. So you don't recognize that out here. And I don't know how you guys, you know, when you guys operate up there in the Pacific Northwest, you probably have more opportunities to filter water. But one of the things we deal with out here is there's just not those opportunities. So it's not unusual for us to be in the field with 6 or 7 liters of water in our pack, just for us, right? Because you never know when you're going to get that resupply, right? Because it might be too hot or windy, or usually too windy, the elements to, you know, where you're not going to get air support. And that's when what you really want to think about for you guys is, if you got a search or a rescue out in this heat, you get those initial hasty teams going, right? Don't load them up with a ton of gear, right? Get them to the patient to build your shelter and do all the good stuff you do. But then when you think about other teams coming in, or if you're going to insert teams, make sure they're bringing extra fluids for the other rescuers too. We spend a lot of time with that. One of the things we're lucky with out here is we've got SAMSAR, our mounted unit, right? The horses and mules, and like there was a call years ago where they come into the field and they're like, hey, you guys, you know, it's 120 degrees. We're looking for some scouts that split up, because, you know, nobody ever stays together. And scouts for sure, right? Even though we teach them that. But But, you know, they said, hey, do you guys need any water? And we're like, no, we're good. And they're like, oh, that's fine. Cause ours is probably still, our water and Gatorade is probably still frozen. I'm like, wait, what? So that's one of the things, you know, freeze a bladder the night before, you know, cause it melts so fast. So those are some of the things we do. And one of the things I was thinking about too, personally, is the sun just takes it out of you, right? So whenever I'm out on these calls, I'm in long pants, hiking boots, long shirt, you know, like the hat that covers, to trying to keep I'll even wear gloves to keep as much sun off of my skin as I can, you know, for two reasons. Number one, it just beats it out of you. And number two, just for sunburn and kind of helping control that. So Justin, I don't know if you guys do the same kind of thing, but just, you know, I you know, it's lightweight gear, but like the 50 SPF type stuff.
Yeah.
You know,
that would be my next point, is covering yourself from the sun. And I know it's counterintuitive to have clothing cover your body when you're trying to breathe. But the sun protection, it's again, a lot like mountaineering, is you still want to be protected from the sun, and you'll burn really fast, and you'll actually, you kind of help regulate that evaporation and that time. So it's really not about like running through the trails trying to get to the person. It's going slow and steady, and you know, kind of like modulating that pace that you're responding, because it's a marathon. It's hardly ever a sprint. And that's actually, as I was prepping for this in the last minute, it was kind of like, those are the two situations that we face, is like something that's immediate. So we can talk about like the prep and considerations for Tech Rock and Swiftwater in the summer. And then we can also talk about like these long exhaustive searches where we send out the hasty team that still can be methodical and not gassing yourself with heavy loads and stuff, and just trying to like make sure that you don't overheat, because Eric mentioned there's other types of teams that are out in the field, right? And so like I belong to the technical rescue posse, or the technical rescue team, and we do search as well. But there's other search specific teams that are out there that don't necessarily prepare as we do. And so we've actually rescued other rescuers and their dogs and their horses. And that's a resource thief. And so this is actually going to be useful. If like this is a recording, this will be useful to share among the community, even in the Southwest, because we need reminders about like the dangers of what we do.
That's a really good point. And really watching out for your team, not just your team, but the other teams that you're operating in the field with. And, you know, it sounds like, you know, when we typically go out, you know, we're mindful of it, but, you know, adding this additional component of heat really brings a different element that we'll have to adjust for, certainly, you know, in the next coming days. Let's see. One of the things I think you mentioned is talking about building a shelter for your subject when you get there. What are some things that you do for that? You know, are you getting them out of the sun, getting them out of the sun, trying to get them out of the heat? What are some things you do there?
Yeah, for us, that's one of the first things we do. You know, if we've got to call up one of these canyons, you know, you get to the subject, and if they're mobile, if they're ambulatory, yeah, you can try to get them to some shade, but we don't have a lot of shade either, not a lot of trees, you know, so that's where a lot of that comes in, is that exposure. So one of the first things we do is get a space blanket up over top of them, right? Even if it's, you know, passersby that are hanging out with them, or family that they might have with them, to get people to just kind of hold it over the person, because it's pretty impressive how, you know, that's in one of our summer trainings where you get one of those IR thermometers, right? And we kind of have a little competition. It's like, who can build the coolest shade, right? And you learn that if you scrape an inch of sand away from the top of the ground, you know, you drop the temperature by 30 degrees just right there, and then you put a shelter on top of it. But really getting them out of the sun and then wetting their clothes. That's another one. Obviously, pouring that canteen over your head is probably the worst way to cool your body, but it's a good way for them to, because usually we got enough water that we can sacrifice a little bit to wet a hat for them or wet their shirt or something, but get a little bit of that cooling action, that wicking action. Now that works here in Tucson and Phoenix just because we don't have the high humidity. But with you guys having the high temperature and the high humidity, I assume you guys have a higher humidity than we do, but maybe not.
I would assume it's a higher humidity. I think we're typically around I'm gonna guess 70%.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, we're 10 to 15%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once the monsoons come in, then we're dealing with humidity and heat. But for the most part, you were right. It's a dry heat relative to what we were experiencing, like in Pennsylvania, and which you get in Florida in the Pacific Northwest forests. One of the other considerations, along with the shelter, is just surfaces. So with that exposure to the sun, we all carry titanium or steel litters, right? This is just one example. Is like if a person is unconscious, and we put them in a litter that's been sitting out in the sun, we could give them serious burns because we weren't aware that their exposed skin was on that metal pin or along that metal rail. And that's almost any surface. So like if we get out there and we respond, we've got to move the person into a cooler area, conscious or not. And then we can start doing the other stuff. But like that is absolutely, it's kind of like, rockfall danger or lightning. Like you don't worry about anything except for their position. And then you can start doing that evaluation. And when we come up to somebody that's just lying down in the direct sun, and when you touch them, they're just hot and dry, you got big problems.
Yeah. But for the litter, are you just if you're just doing a quick scoop, so if you will, are you just using a regular ground pad, or is there anything to protect them from the heat of the litter?
Yeah, well, sorry, dear Eric. Basically, we use we actually have a moving pad because it keeps them off of the wires, and it keeps them insulated whether it's cool or hot. And we can kind of wrap it around their arms. It's a thin moving pad, and it also helps move the person around in that litter. And yeah, it's just a matter of like being aware of where their body is in relation to all of the hot surfaces around. And the more you can do what Eric was saying, which is like shade, it's not just the subject, but it's like the equipment that you're going to be using for the subject. And before everybody hopped on, I was talking to Doug about this, is like, if you're carrying IV or fluids or any of the, any equipment that you might have to put on a person, in 110 degree weather, that will be really hot and uncomfortable if you apply it without any consideration of cooling. And so Eric said, like, one of the preps is freeze bottles of water, Gatorade or whatever. I do Gatorade because you can add water to it. This is one of those intuitive tips or tricks, is like you freeze a concentrated bottle of Gatorade, and then you just drink the syrup along with the water that you've been drinking, and you can keep pouring water into the Gatorade as needed. And it's a great slushy. But you keep those bottles near the equipment that you might be applying to the patient. So they all stay cooler than ambient temperature. And it's just a better patient care.
Yes, for us, in the litter, that's a good thought about a thin moving blanket, Justin. I'll keep that one in mind. We've got like a Stokes bag that we take out, and one of the things that not only putting the padding underneath them, so you'll realize it's hot. So if you guys don't already have gloves, I mean, you always wear gloves with the litter, right? Just because it gets hot, and that's when you kind of recognize that that you got to take care of the patient. But we also have thin white sheets, so we put a white sheet over the patient to keep them out of the sun. And then you can wet that sheet too.
That's a
then
good.
another.
Don't do that either, huh?
You keep that wet. So another one of the pro tips that can be kind of silly, but I think it's pretty cool is go down to the dollar store and get some squirt bottles, right? And like a lot of us will carry a little squirt bottle in our pack. You pull that out and you squirt each other with it. Oh man, you know, that's if you're the guy who pulls out a squirt bottle, that's golden. Or gal, that's golden. Yeah. So that's been fun. We had one training where at the end of it, it was super hot. One of the rescuers pulled out some ice cream bars tucked in dry ice.
Oh.
You know, if you can think that far ahead on a call, then you'll be, that's a serious pro tip right there.
The dry ice is a great pro tip. We actually, so we train intentionally in the middle of July. And for the people that are going through the recruit process, learning how to take care of others is part of what we do. And so if you lose a contest or something, the previous training, you have to supply ice cream during lunch of the next one. And I was stuck in July having to supply the ice cream in the middle of a training, and it's 115 degrees out. We're like 5 miles from the trailhead. How do you do that? It's dry ice. I got a lot of brownie points with command. This is like 10 years ago. Except I lost some of those points because that dry ice actually froze solid, the ice cream bars, like solid.
Yep. We had to wait too on ours.
So you're like putting it on a rock, waiting for it. But this is all experience that you need to know and you need to get, especially like when you're responding to the heat, is like, what's going to work and what's not going to work. Dry ice is clever. It gets lighter as you carry it. Right. But then you run the risk of, it's hard to get. But then you run the risk of actually freezing something that you need.
Yeah. So let's see. I like the freezing the bottles of either frozen water, frozen Gatorade, or whatever electrolyte drink. Eric, you mentioned that sheet covering, and then with some water for cooling if you've got a patient that's needs to be cooled. Are there other things that you have, like when you're packaging the patient, as far as like a light sheet or anything like that? We would typically wrap a burrito style with a tarp and everything else to prevent for rain.
Yeah.
But we're not going to have that in the next couple of days. And I really like that sheet idea if it's for cooling and things like that too.
Yeah, the sheet's perfect. I love that idea. Of course, you don't want to wrap them too tight like a burrito because it's about dissipating the heat at that point. So those frozen bottles that everybody's carrying goes in the crotch and the pits and the neck. And that's commonplace. Like, you wrap it with a towel, just like you would a heated bottle, so you don't burn anybody or cause discomfort. But like that's essential.
Cool.
Yeah, getting it by those femoral arteries, right? That's a great way to cool. Absolutely.
One question on rigging operations. Are there any different considerations with rigging in high heat versus that you guys typically think about? Like, hey, consider all hardware to be hot.
Like Eric said, we're always wearing gloves. We don't touch ropes without gloves, right? For many reasons. So I would say just there really isn't any special consideration that I can think of. The equipment does get hotter though. So like, when you're rappelling down a long wrap and there's some sand in the rope, it heats up and burns through your descent device. That happens faster when the temperatures are 50 degrees higher than when you're doing that wrapping. Right. And so like those are considerations, but our ropes and the pulleys that we use and stuff, like I guess over time, the wear and tear would be more significant, but I just think it's be very careful with the metal components in your own hands in contact. Eric, what do you think?
Yeah. from the technical gear side for sure. One of the things that I like to help with the team to remember is if you're sitting there, like if you're on rappel or if you're belaying somebody, right, you're there for quite a while. So, but if you're there belaying, or if you're on a haul system or something, and you're gonna be sitting there for a while in the sun, right, to prepare yourself before you sit down and take that spot, right? So maybe, put on your Camelback or have your hose nearby so you can drink, so you don't have, because you're gonna get thirsty. And the other thing that several of us have is those, what's that, CMC sombrero, like they can go over your helmet, right? So if you can keeping yourself shaded, I think that's probably one of my biggest things is just, I really try to keep myself shaded, or put one of those hats with tails under your helmet, right? Just keeping the sun off you while you're operating that equipment that's already blistering hot for sure. I think other than that, it's pretty much just normal. I don't think to Justin's point, wear and tear might be a little bit higher in some situations, but I don't think from the technical perspective, things change too much for us.
Any concerns on, I mean, I see dynamia, low melt temperatures. Do you guys care, or have any experience there? Or
so with the cordage, I don't think it's any more significant than what you'd experience in typical rescue scenarios, where, like, if you have if you're using a prusik on a line, like you can burn it up by running it up and down the line without unlocking it. But I don't think that's any more significant as long as it's dry. I mean, we're not talking about the difference between alpine with snow and hot weather, but just hot weather.
Right.
I don't think it's anything different.
Right.
Yeah, I think our soft goods are we just stick with the 11 mil rope and 1 inch tubular webbing. It's pretty much all we run. There's some specialty gear, but other than not like much.
8 mil.
7 or 8 mil prusiks, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things, Doug, that had popped into my mind when we were talking earlier about back on the self-care.
Yeah.
And I try to bring this up to the teams too, is we all love riding on helicopters, but the problem is they can bury you deep fast, right? And so if you guys have searches and you're going to get inserted via air, make sure, obviously you always go in with your pack, but assume you're not going to get a ride out. You're going to have to hike out, right? So if you think you're going to go in for a quick 1 hour search, assume that it's going to end up being an all day hike and you're going to have to hike back to the trailhead. So make sure you're thinking about that if you're on one of those teams. We had that situation. I mean, it wasn't a situation, but we had that case on, I guess, Tuesday. I think we had a big search, a 3-day search down here. And a team got inserted pretty deep and they ended up having to hike out. The air support had to leave and go. Actually, they found the subject and they were done, right? We try to pull teams out, but it didn't work out that way. So it does happen. So just keep that in mind.
For fire weather zones, OR 639, OR.
Get to mute, Jeff.
Okay, got it. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great point. And so let's see, if I try to recap a little bit, frozen water bottles, the light sheet for covering subject. Water, you typically said, I think you carry 3 to 4 liters. Is that right?
In summer, it's like 5 to 6 or 7 liters of liquid.
Wow.
Because we all have at least a 3 to 3.5 liter bladder or equivalent. And then we carry a couple liter bottles of Gatorade or something else, or powder, which is more flexible, right? You can add it to anything. I think Eric's probably the same way. Those are on searches. But he hit the nail on the head when he said the helicopters take you in deep into the wilderness and you have to be able to get out. you know, they might, like the helicopters might have an understanding of where you're going in, and it's happened often. Trained, like even with the best trained folks, where you get set on a ridge because you trust the crew that they know where you were supposed to go, and you're on a ridge over, and they're still managing resources elsewhere. So you still have to get to your search area. And, you know, you don't know that until you get out of the helicopter and you check your GPS or something. So, like anything can happen, and you got to be prepared to spend, that 36 hours. If you're a 36-hour team, you got to be able to spend 36 hours out there. And that is unrealistic. If you think about, sweating out 3 liters of water and absorbing only a liter of water, how fast that takes to get into a deficit that's not survivable, right? So you're running on water fumes within just a few hours of exertion.
Wow.
Yeah, you kind of just assume. I mean, you assume you're going on the call already somewhat dehydrated.
Yeah.
Right? So it's hard to. I mean, nobody's perfectly hydrated.
Cool.
The physics just doesn't work out for long-term survival in the desert without additional like water resources, and there's no water here. That might be a little bit different situation than you're dealing with in the Pacific Northwest, where water's a little bit more abundant.
Yeah.
But I would say bring water filters or whatever you do, to make sure that you have access to the water.
That's a good point. And yeah, definitely water filters. I guess if you're on Mount Rainier, Mount Baker, Mount Hood, or any of the volcanoes, or even it's still relatively early season for us. So there's still plenty of snow, even at what would be relatively low elevation. There's probably still some snow around 3,500 feet, and especially in the shaded areas. So we could probably pack an Nalgene with water to help for cooling a patient.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, we're getting into like about just a little over 30 minutes in. I want to be mindful of time and everyone who joined, and want to open it up to the group for questions that you all may have. If you've got a question, just come off mute and shoot.
Hey, Doug, while people are thinking about that, one of the last things that we also do that can be kind of a pain is if you're out searching in the middle of the afternoon, you find somebody and you don't have good air support, and you find some shade, you hang out with them, rehydrate till dark, hike out at night.
Yeah.
So we've done that plenty of times too, because that's just safe.
Good call.
Do you have any opinion on something like the Noon NUUN versus Gatorade?
I didn't pick up that first part.
Oh, so Noon.
Noon. Got it.
Yeah.
Any electrolyte drink. The lower the sugar, most of the time, is probably better. But it's situation dependent, and what you've learned is best for your body. It's always that continuum, right? Is like yourself, your team, and then everybody else. And so it's like that stuff is for you. You know that you're going in and you're going to be providing it to the patient and stuff, and you can change the electrolyte solution. But Gatorade is often too sugary, and I'm thinking Noon is probably more for athletic recovery, right? Like athletes, a little bit less sugar, higher salt.
Yeah. I've had luck with it's called Liquid IV. It's you can get it at Costco or any of these places, but where I've had a patient who was cramping or just really I guess dehydrated on the trail, we got them that the Liquid IV, and he was a young guy and he bounced back really quick, and then we're trying to tell him to like, hey, just slow it down a little bit. We don't need to jog back to the trailhead.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was useful. Comment on the sugary stuff. I have also given people swigs of Gatorade, and that comes back up very quickly if they're pretty overly hydrated. I mean,
so one of the things that, again, it's very similar to mountaineering, so you're all more familiar with this than I am, but it's like salt tablets, and those salt, the like just salty snacks and salt stuff, like, you know, they, as long as they can tolerate eating something, that might just be just as effective, and you can take it in slower. You take it with water, and I don't know. It's definitely situation dependent. Eric probably has been on many calls where you have illegal crossers, and they've been without water, without food for a long time, and you have Gatorade, you have water, and you have snacks, but because they've been without it for so long and exposed to such extreme conditions, you actually can't give it to them. You have to, like, for us anyways, our protocols is to talk to our medical control and make sure that, like, you know, we're good to give them something, and then they're usually like, sip it, you know.
Yeah, definitely sip it. Definitely cut it down with some water, right? I mean, I'm not a Gatorade drinker just because it is so sugary, but if you do, we do use Gatorade a lot. But definitely cut it down with some water and let them sip it. But anything else works. You know, I've got some electrolyte things that I can drop in a bottle that is no sugar or whatever, and works just fine. And the sugar, it's nice to avoid the sugar, because if you put it in like a Camelback or something, it won't mold overnight.
Awesome. Any other questions from the field? And while folks are thinking about it, I'll give Eric and Justin a second to think about, if you were in the Pacific Northwest, you're getting ready to have a large heat event. What is the one thing that you know you would tell your fellow MRA teams? This is kind of the most important thing to think about for both your personal. Well, this is a huge question now, for your personal safety, for your team safety.
Yeah, I guess I could say some first is just to look out for each other, right? You guys each know each other's normal, right? And if you're not feeling it, say something, right? Don't go out, because we've had enough situations where, you know, you want to be on that call, but then, you know, you end up, you know, on the news being hoisted out, which you don't want to be. So just watching out for yourself and each other, I think, is probably the number one, because it's, you know, it's our responsibility to pre-hydrate. It's our responsibility to come prepared, you know, but really looking out for each other and thinking about it before you go is important.
Yeah. For me, it's that prep, like using that 3 liters of water a day is kind of like the goal every day, so that I know that I can be ready to respond. And you watching yourself and your teammates and being like hyper aware. Just think back to that first Alpine mission that you had, and like how closely you have to watch yourself, the intake, and your everybody else, to make sure that you know, the frostbite and the mentation is still there, because it's almost the same patterns with heat exhaustion, with heat stress, illness, and heat illness is like, people just don't act right. They get cramps. That's your first indication that you're not doing something that you should be, right? And that is really hard to hide. So like, you're walking with your buddy on a search, and you start like, they oh, hold on, oh, my leg cramped up, or you know, it's just those indicators are your first trigger to change something. So it's compensate.
That's awesome. Can I ask one last question? And it's a slightly add question. What about the MRA buffs? Do you use those for
100%? So here's the only thing for me is the MRA buffs I like to use them in the cold weather because they're dark. And so I have the this isn't a promotion or anything. The Outdoor Research sells a wonderfully light buff that's bright yellow. And I love that thing because it just reflects the sunlight. It keeps you cool. And yes, I wear it all the way over my face in the heat of the summer. And I don't get yelled at by my spouse because she sees the burns on the back of my neck and my face.
Right.
Yep. I don't know how many times I'll come home after a call and my wife will look at me and ask if I put sunscreen on, and I just have to walk away. But yeah, I guess that's the other thing is sunscreen, and yeah, I agree. My MRA buff, it's in my pack. I've got the bright orange ERM one that I got at the conference from Emergency Response Manager. That'll be my plug for Sean. But the other thing is not only does that keep the sun off your face and your ears, but if you're doing air operations, it keeps the sand out of your nose and mouth and ears as well.
That's awesome. Well, great. I mean, this has been really fantastic. If there are any other questions from folks, please just jump in. And really appreciate the kind of last minute pulling this together. And really, I love this value of the MRA of being able to reach out to other teams across the country, especially when you guys are going to get a cold spell, and give us a call. And
absolutely,
we'll say no cotton, and dress warm in layers.
There you go. No, I think that's great. Yeah, I appreciate you pulling this together. I'm happy to do it too.
Yeah. Also, thanks to Ken Herron. You beat me to it. Go ahead, Ken.
Oh, nothing. I just wanted to thank Justin and Eric. Eric was out of the game for a little bit, and then he decided to come back with a vengeance and let me know. So I was really happy that he's there and able to support this and support me. And Justin just took over from Roger down in camera, and I've had the fortune to work with Justin in the past. And so I was really happy that at short notice you two guys could come together and pull this out like I had any doubts. And I was just hoping that I could get home in time just to catch the tail end of this. But really good information and stuff that sparks the memory. Eric, you had a really good point, something I hadn't thought of before about subject down there, just removing the topsoil, getting down to that cool layer, obvious things like that you may just not think about. I think that's really good. That's a really good pro tip. And just for me personally, one of the things that I always do, I always have a bandana, either around my neck or because I'm follically challenged, it's on top of my head. And the nice thing about it is that anytime I'm near any sort of water source, even if it's just the creek or, a little puddle somewhere out there, I don't care if it's wet, dunk it, put it back on my head, cooling effect, even putting it around my neck for the cooling effect. It doesn't have to be as extreme as the water bottle down in Tucson, but it kind of does the job. And it's, really versatile, fits underneath my tech helmet, keeps me cool. So anyways, I really appreciate this. And Doug, you putting this together as well. Thanks.
Well, thanks everyone. I'm just going to stop recording.